Jesus in the words in the prophecies of the Old Testament. Let's here. Full screen. All right, we should be ready to go now. Okay, we were talking about the Daniel 9 prophecy of the 77s, and this prophecy was hinted at in the Melchizedek scroll. We was talking about that, the 10 Jubilee periods of 49 years, and after that, you'd have the ultimate Day of Atonement with this coming of this Melchizedek figure. And he will atone for the sins of the sons of light. Well, when you look at the interpretations of the 70 weeks prophecy, here are a few early church history interpretations. We have Julius Africanus and Clement of Alexandria and Eusebius of Caesarea. So here's Julius Africanus. The coming of Christ is foretold as to occur after 70 weeks. For in the time of our Savior, iniquities are blotted out by a propitiation. Eternal righteousness is published beyond that of the law. The 70 weeks are 490 years. He's definitely seeing, this is around 200 AD, this early church figure is seeing the 70 weeks of prophecy as being a 490-year period from the time of Daniel that gets us to the time of Christ. And that's pointing to the end of the Mosaic era and the propitiation of Jesus. Clement of Alexandria, that the temple accordingly was built in 7 weeks of years. That's the first 70, in 77 sevens, then 62. That's 7 sevens is a 49-year period or so. And that period is the first section where, like, he was in a time of trouble. Ezra talks about this. It's evident this is where I get that idea, for it is written in Ezra. And in the 62 weeks, the whole of Judea was quiet and without war. And Christ our Lord, the Holy of Holies, came and fulfilled the vision and the prophecy in 1 week. So you have the 7 plus the 62 and then the one final week. So that one final week is a period of 7 years. But the whole makes that 490-year period. And in that middle of that last week is when the sacrifice happens and the Messiah is cut off. Eusebius of Caesarea. The archangel Gabriel foretells that after a predetermined time, Jerusalem will again be destroyed, and that after the second capture and siege it will, and that after the second capture and siege, it will no longer have God for its guardian, but will remain desolate with the worship of the Mosaic law taken away from it, and another new covenant with humanity introduced in its place. That, by the way, is something acknowledged by Jewish scholars. There's a guy named John Levinson at Harvard who argues, he's a professor of Judaism at Harvard, and he's a fascinating theologian. But he says that Christianity is older than Judaism.
What is older?
I know, right? It sounds crazy. But you know what? He's right. Because Judaism, modern Judaism, starts at about 90 AD, because it had to be reformulated without a temple. Modern Judaism is built on not having temple sacrifice. It's funny. I remember as a kid, I came into the house once, and my grandparents were visiting, and I asked my grandpa if he wanted to have lunch. He said, "No, I'm fasting." I said, "You're fasting?" We weren't particularly observant Jews. We were kind of like, yeah, we go to temple when we want, and we didn't keep kosher, all that kind of stuff. Biggest challenge for a Jewish person, the biggest challenge, a sign that says free bacon. Oh, that's the biggest challenge. So my family was okay with bacon. We were, we kind of would do some of the high holy days. We'd go to the services, but we weren't into fasting. My grandpa was. He was an older generation. And I said, "You're fasting?" He says, "Yes, it's Yom Kippur. I'm atoning for my sin." Wow. The Day of Atonement became, you do these things at table prayer, and your obediences replaces the Mosaic temple liturgy, worship, the blood, all that stuff. It's reformulated. Okay, so it starts after 70, but Christianity goes back to 30. So John Levinson, a Jewish scholar, says Christianity is older than Judaism. Interesting. And this is what he's saying here. Eusebius is saying Daniel prophesied that the end of the Mosaic era would happen because the temple is destroyed, never to be rebuilt again. And that a new covenant with humanity would be introduced in its place. It's quite clear that 7 times 7 weeks, reckoned in years, amounts to 490. That was therefore the period determined for Daniel's people, which limited the total length of the Jewish nation's existence.
Shane, a lot
Yes.
of that number, that grid just happens to be something that corresponds to actual history. I mean, the way you first presented it is like, yeah, we do things in sevens. We need 490 of them to get to the ultimate jubilee.
Are you wondering how does it actually work out?
Well, I'm just saying, you're also saying that it also corresponds historically to 490 years.
Yeah, it does. The challenge is when you try to take it from the proclamation of Cyrus, which is about the period when Daniel is writing, and there is a decree from Cyrus to let the people go to Jerusalem, but not to rebuild the temple. The decree to rebuild the temple and the city happens with a guy named Artaxerxes or something like that. Artaxerxes. And he is, I don't know, sometime further down. And when you start from the clock ticking from that period, because the prophecy doesn't specify which king, but if you start from that period, it does take you around the time of Jesus. And I think that's the best explanation. That's what most of the early church fathers did too. When if they specify, that's what they say.
So I think I sent you a link to a group that thinks they've got sevens happening too, and that they believe the Messiah is coming in the year 2180.
We should
Because
look
of
into
the way they've done their numbers.
I can see that.
So that would be a futurist interpretation. The challenge with this approach is that, a lot of people will have a pause on that final week. And that's how they say Daniel is pointing to things future. It's like you have a sequence of 490 years with a 2,000-year pause in that last week. What?
Yeah.
And it's just, if you do that, you can pull all kinds of rabbits out of hats that way. I think there's a very clear indication that this was going to be fulfilled in the time of Jesus. And that is, at the end of the book of Daniel, God says, but you, Daniel, seal this up until the time of the end. And then, when you get to the time of Jesus, Jesus says, and as Daniel wrote, let the reader understand. He's unsealing the book, because it's the time of the end. He's speaking about the destruction of the temple in his era, and he's applying the abomination of desolation language to what's happening to his generation.
Shane?
Yeah.
A book, Jews for Jesus, about 10 years ago, it had several accounts of Jewish believers in the Messiah. And one of the comments by one of the writers said, he saw this in Daniel, started to see the Messiah, talked to his rabbi. He said, well, it doesn't mean that. And it actually alerted him and says, oh, great, even my rabbi thinks this refers to the Messiah, because he was being argumentative.
Yeah.
But he said, to this day, and this is what he said 30, 40 years ago, the book of Daniel is not really read much in synagogues because it's got so much of this
Well,
accuracy.
what's interesting is I've heard Dennis Prager, who is a very national broadcaster. Do you guys get him here?
Yeah.
So he's a national broadcaster, probably the most popular conservative Jewish voice in America. And he argued that one time that conservative Jews have much more of an emphasis on the Torah than they do the prophets. The prophets, they talk about speculative things, but we're sort of here with ethical monotheism, the values that come out of the Torah. So they don't really think about, there's a lot of different speculations about what the prophets mean about this and that. That was not the case with the ancient Jews who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were definitely interested in both law and prophets, and both were just as equally inspired and just as equally important, and they were all Messianic. They were Messianic. In fact, one of the things that I found as I converted to Christianity is I found some of these single verses that you say, there are 50 Messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. I hope you've seen yesterday and today that there's a lot more, there's a lot more of Jesus. Sometimes not just a prophecy about Jesus, but Jesus is the one there making the prophecy. There are these single line prophecies that I thought as a new believer, I don't know, that's kind of speculative. It's like, of the 50, I'm going to put that at number 50. Because I saw there was a limited number of these. But I was looking for the very clear ones. And the more you kind of spend time really meditating on, you see Jesus everywhere. But with some of those that I thought were speculative, again, having had a historical theology degree and then reflecting for another 30 years on the meaning of some of these texts and reading ancient Jewish reflection on them, I've seen all over the place where it's not just Christians who are speculating about this. The ancient Jews were speculating about these same texts. They were seeing, in the passages that I thought were weak, they were saying this is about the Messiah. All right. Here is a little bit more from the Melchizedek scroll, speaking about ancient Jews and their views. Here's what this text goes on to say. This is the time decreed for the year of Melchizedek's favor. When I had Craig Evans on the show, he said, "That's amazing." And the reason he said that's amazing in that way, in that tone, is because this is actually a quote from Isaiah 61, verse 2, which says, this is the year of the Lord's favor. This is the year of Yahweh's favor. And it changes the text and puts in this name Melchizedek. In other words, showing it's an altered version, showing that they do believe that the coming Messiah, whom it names Melchizedek, is an incarnation of Yahweh. This is the time decreed from the year of Melchizedek's favor and for his hosts, Lord of hosts. And it is written, as it is written concerning him in the Psalms of David, a godlike being has taken his place in the council of God. In the midst of the divine beings, he holds judgment. That's, of course, not an ordinary man. This is one who's in the council of God. This visitation is the day of salvation that he has decreed through Isaiah the prophet. Quote, "How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your divine being reigns." Isaiah 52. It's the very beginning of the servant song, the suffering servant, that I was told doesn't refer to the Messiah. It's the suffering of Israel. This writer in Qumran saw the suffering servant prophecy by Isaiah as being fulfilled in the divine Messiah, the one who is Yahweh, who speaks for Yahweh and is Yahweh. The scripture's interpretation, the messenger is the anointed of the Spirit of whom Daniel spoke. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. It's affirming the death of this divine Messiah. The messenger who brings good news, who announces salvation, is the one of whom it is written to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus' first sermon was on that text. Your divine being is Melchizedek. He's a divine being who will deliver them from the power of Belial. Paul uses that same word referring to Satan. It was very common 100 years before Jesus. It kind of went out of use, but Paul does have one reference to that, using that word. Now, think about the implications here of this language of Melchizedek. Psalm 110, I think, helps us to understand why he chose the name Melchizedek. You could think, first of all, of the historical figure. Abraham pays tithes to the king of Salem, who is called the king of righteousness. Melech and Zedek that's what Melchizedek means, the king of righteousness. But he's from Salem, which later becomes Jerusalem. Okay, so he's the king of Salem, and he's honored by Abraham. So that historical figure is then used in a prophetic way by the psalmist about 1,000 years later. The Lord said to my Lord, wait, there's two Lords? That's weird. Yeah. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power. So it's free. This is the difference between most kingdoms when they come in through power, they tell you what to do. With their command, they have their scepter, you shall obey. This Exodus, this liberation, it's liberation, not captivity. And they offer themselves freely. That's why we're here on a Saturday. We could be golfing.
Nice Saturday, too.
Okay, don't get crazy. I gotta finish my lecture. They will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. I don't know about you, but that's got to be something given to me externally. I will put on this garment that's given to me. It's a gift. From the womb of the morning, the dew of your youth will be yours. The Lord has sworn, and it will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. This is the Lord swearing. It's Yahweh swearing about this other one. The Father speaking about the Son. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So that is, he is a priest. He's a priest king who reigns from Zion, from Salem. He's a priest king in the order of Melchizedek. Not a Levitical priest, but this other sort of strange priest. And the author of Hebrews interacts with that. The Qumran scroll writer took this as imagery. It's like, I'm going to give him the name Melchizedek. That part didn't end up being true. Jesus wasn't named Melchizedek, but he definitely was thinking about all these interesting passages that really unpack what the Messiah was going to come and do. All right, so Nathan, turns out, wrote a book that we don't have. We don't have the book of Nathan, but there's a reference to the prophecy, the book of the prophecies of Nathan, mentioned in one of the Old Testament history books. Wouldn't it be cool if we discovered it one day? Like, what would that do, if you find a book of Nathan? Anyway, we do have some of the prophecies of Nathan recorded in the history books. For example, in this prophecy, David comes to Nathan and says, hey, I live in this wonderful house. It's a palace, and God lives in a tent. Something wrong there. And Nathan says, well, whatever you want to do, God be with you. But later on, he gets this message from God saying, go back to David and tell him this, which is a good example for us to recognize the fact that prophets spoke occasionally. They spoke occasionally. They weren't always filled with the Spirit. They were also human beings. That's why inspiration doesn't account for we don't have, Nathan's laundry list, and that's not, if we found it, it wouldn't be added to the text. So he speaks something, but then he corrects himself the next day, showing he's human, right? But Jesus, on the other hand, always spoke God's word. Why did he always speak of? Because he was God. Thus saith the Lord, would you build me a house? The Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. Here's a definite play on words. Because the house of a king is called a palace. And the house of a god is called a temple. And another word for the house of a king could be dynasty. So it's the house through time, And here, would you build me a house? Are you going to build me a temple? I'm going to build you a house. But he means dynasty. Wow. The Lord declares he will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. It almost sounds like it's further down the line, like you're dead, I'm going to raise up after you. Solomon was actually, he kind of claimed once he's built the temple, I fulfilled the promise of my father. Yeah, but it said it was going to be eternal, and the temple that you built last. I don't think Solomon, I think it may have been a hint of things to come, but I don't think it really fulfills this promise. Here's the full promise. I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. Notice there, the house God's going to build is a kingdom. That's why I think dynasty is the better translation. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. Ooh, it's going to be a forever kingdom. That's unusual. By the way, look at the bottom here. If you can see it from the back, this is a prayer I found from an inscription in a book about things we found related to Nebuchadnezzar. This ancient inscription records the following prayer by Nebuchadnezzar. May the house I have made endure to all eternity, O Marduk. May my posterity rule over men forever and ever. This is Nebuchadnezzar's prayer, but Marduk wasn't able to deliver because Yahweh had already promised it a couple of hundred years earlier to one of the sons of David, and that promise came true. It's interesting, isn't it? In the days of Daniel, you can think about like what Nebuchadnezzar was doing and the images that he was given about the kingdom of gold that would then go to the kingdom of silver and then to bronze and then to iron. Like, your kingdom isn't going to last very long, sorry. But he actually prayed that it would last forever. It would just be a kingdom of gold all the way down, forever and ever. But that promise was already given to the offspring of David. Then it says, I will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Here's where it gets interesting. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men and the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul. So Saul commits one infraction, and poof, he was, no longer fit to be king. And I think there was a scene in which he performed a priestly rite because the priest didn't show up, and he's now not. It's just a small infraction, but if God said, no, you are no longer authorized to serve as king, we're going to find a replacement. And it's the strict fulfillment of the law. But then you compare that to what happened with David. You say, holy moly, this was a capital offense. It's worthy of capital punishment, which is why David had to get an exemption from the prophet Nathan. This sin will not be held against you, because there was no atonement that could provide for that particular high-handed sin. He gets a special exemption for that offense, and yet he still has the blessing of God going forward. And you see that going forward through his dynasty from all the sons who did what was evil in the sight of God, but he still has the promise. This is why I think you've got to understand this prophecy corporately of the dynasty, and there are different heads carrying the dynasty forward, and sometimes they are sinful. They were pretty good, kind of like David, but they didn't get rid of all the high places. This king who rose up did what was really evil in the sight of God, and he reigned a short time. So you have all these checkered, decent, not very good, really bad, in the line of David. And at some point, the entire thing is cut off, and they are shipped off to Babylon. And yet there's that Isaiah prophecy, a stump, from the stump of Jesse, a shoot will sprout forward. You ever been in like the woods where you see a stump and then a little twig coming up out of the stump? That's the imagery that he gives. Because even though it looks like a stump, it's not over. The Davidic line will continue. And some have said, like I've taught a Bible class before where someone reads this part, when he commits iniquity, I will discipline him. And they say, but that doesn't look like a prophecy about Jesus. Ultimately, this is fulfilled in Jesus, but the prophecy is of the dynasty that will be forever. It's just that you have temporary placeholders until you get there, until it's fulfilled in Jesus. But the reason we know it's fulfilled in Jesus is that Hebrews tells us that it is. Hebrews 1:5. For to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son today, I have begotten you? Or again, I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. The book of Hebrews applies this to Jesus. He says that prophecy was definitely about Jesus. But if you think about that from a dynastic point of view, there are these office holders who are very weak. All the prophets, priests, and kings were bad, poor reflections of the ultimate office bearer who will take that on eternally. They're all temporary office holders in the Davidic line until the ultimate son of David comes. The implications of Psalm 2. This is also related here to, if you think about that Davidic promise, David is discussing, he's told he's going to have a king on his throne who will have a kingdom that goes to all eternity. All right, so if you take that idea and then read Psalm 2, then you see some of the parallels. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and his anointed. Interesting, we've been studying this throughout this weekend here. You have the Lord and his anointed one. You have two separate individuals, and yet they're the ones with the eternal kingdom. They are taking their counsel against them and saying, let us break their bonds apart, cast away their cords from us. We want to do our own thing, kind of like what Adam and Eve wanted to do. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Sounds like the Father speaking of the human king, Jesus, who is now reigning in Zion. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, wait a minute, switch of voice. I will tell of the decree. Who's speaking now? I will tell of the decree. Yahweh said to me, you are my son. You are my son. The son is speaking. Notice that. That's a fascinating shift. This kind of thing happens a lot in the Old Testament, particularly in the writings of the prophets. Jesus is speaking here in this passage in Psalm 2. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. That was never the something that David announced about his own kingship. There are those who try to argue that Psalm 2 was originally written by David. I don't think that this really applies, that he's going to expand the Davidic kingdom to the entire earth. Part of the reason why is it was still in the Mosaic covenant. You couldn't go very far because you had these Mosaic commands that you always had to come to Jerusalem for all the feasts. You had to be in covenant, so you can't expand this to Alaska. You know? You just can't, it's not functional. You have to come here so many times for these feasts, and you can only do sacrifice at this one place. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. This is the same one who showed himself at the burning bush. Kiss the Son, lest ye be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. Not a sentimental picture of Jesus, but this is definitely the story of Jesus, because he is the Son who was begotten in time and space and who does make the ends of the earth his possession. To this day, his kingship is the oldest and broadest in all the world. And it's a voluntary kingship. He doesn't command everyone by force to worship him. Some religions do that. Christianity never has. We are here voluntarily, and we worship voluntarily every Lord's Day, honoring the one who gave his life for a redemption that is worldwide. These are my words, Jesus says in Luke 24, that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the Psalms and the prophets must be fulfilled. Thus it is written that Christ should suffer and on the third day rise, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed to all nations, beginning with Jerusalem. So the Psalms are about him, and the writings of the prophets, and the writings of Moses, and it's going to go international. So Jesus is helping us to see that's the way we should read the Bible. It's about him. And then when you read through the book of Acts, just read through the prophecies, read through the speeches. There's just not a single sermon in the book of Acts which says how you can have your best life now. There isn't. What you do find are Christ-centered sermons everywhere. All right, international promises. Look at the scope of these promises, starting with the Genesis 22. You know, that's not the only one. There's a lot of them. This is just a part for the whole. Genesis, in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Okay, in your seed. Paul says that seed is a singular seed. He's the one in whom the blessings come to the world. The actual goal with the Abrahamic and promises, the patriarchs' promises, was to bless the earth The Mosaic era was a pause on that because they had to go slay the neighbors. Don't spare us. Just go in and get rid of the Amalekites. But that was so that they could carve out a space for the nation of Israel to be a guardian, to entrust the promises over time until the ultimate fulfillment. This is Paul's argument in Galatians 3. It's a guardianship that they're entrusted with. And they had to sort of, and he says, the covenant that was made in the time of Moses didn't nullify the promise to the fathers. It was just this guardianship. And the ultimate fulfillment is Christ. The coming of Christ, though, has to be understood with all that Mosaic information. So it's that 1,000 years that we get the architecture of atonement and propitiation and cleansing and consecration and all that's how we understand the significance of all that Christ achieved. Okay, Psalm 22. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. This is the implication, the question that is asked at the beginning of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? It sounds like the absolute inversion of triumph. But it ends with triumph. It's that suffering servant who ends up shutting the mouths of the kings. And then he is worshipped throughout the land. And that actually happened in history. This is where you read people like Augustine and Eusebius, and they say, even Augustine actually comments on this very passage. He says, even the blind can see the end of this psalm, which says all the nations of the earth will come and worship. Look around. It's happened. Yeah. Isaiah 2. It shall come to pass in the latter days, again, the latter days from the Old Testament period is not the end of all days. It's the end of the Mosaic era. That's a key insight. In the latter days, that the mountain of the house of Yahweh shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. Okay, 700 BC this prophecy is made. It's very similar to the Daniel promise of a stone that comes in the days of the latter fourth kingdom, latter days. That latter fourth, and it grows to become a mountain that fills the entire earth. It's that mountain image that we're in that age of the mountain growing and expanding and filling the earth. And the gates of hell will not prevail against its expansion. Jesus is he's just interpreting, he's giving you different ways of seeing what the prophets have been announcing all along. But they're all international promises that actually came true, which is why we can have confidence that other prophecies that haven't yet been fulfilled will come to pass. Isaiah 5. He will raise a signal for nations far away and whistle from them from the ends of the earth, and behold, quickly, speedily they come. Again, this is what Pastor Moore was talking about this morning. It's like he's gathering the people from around the world. One of the prophecies, he even says, and I shall take some of the Gentiles for priests. Mm-hmm. What? What kind of thing is that? Like, you can't have, forget Gentiles. You can't have non-Levites as priests. Okay? They are like racist within racists. Okay? Like one specific race. You got to be Jewish, but secondarily, you got to be a Levite within the Jewish to be a priest. Okay? Specific. Okay, racist is a majority. That's a very loaded word. I shouldn't use that. But you get the point. They had to have a specific qualification. These are the people qualified for the priesthood. And I will take some Gentiles for priests. That's a prophecy toward the end of Isaiah. 9:6. For unto us a child was born. We've seen this one. A son is given. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. It's going to grow. The expanding mountain, just like Daniel said. And on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. It's a forever kingdom. It's expanding slowly over time. And it's going to continue to expand until the last day. 27. In the days to come, Jacob shall take root, Israel shall blossom and put forth shoots and fill the whole world with fruit. This is the same story, but with a different imagery. It's different metaphor here. Instead of a mountain, it's a big tree. And you find New Testament does this too. You'll have the temple is no longer an earthly Jerusalem. It's, Jesus says to John 4, the woman's well, it's not going to be in this place or that place. It's going to be this, wherever people are worshiping in spirit and truth. But he does speak of a temple and a cornerstone. He is the cornerstone of the temple, and he adds to it, Peter says this, living stones. And we are those living stones that are added to the temple. And that temple continues to grow. It's a growing, expanding temple. That's another way to think about it. Or a head and the body. That's a body metaphor. Or branch and vines, yeah. I am the vine, you are the branches. So the vine with branches. That's a horticultural metaphor. You have all these different kind of metaphors that are all saying the same thing. Here is the Daniel 2 prophecy of the expanding mountain. The stone that struck the image and became a great mountain filled the entire earth in the days of those kings of the fourth kingdom. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to other people. It shall break into pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Guess what? Babylonian kingdom is gone. Not only is it gone, it's totally desolated. Like if you go there today, it's just ruins, and it was prophesied by the Hebrew prophets that it would be that way, that it would be a haunt of jackals, and that's the way it still is to this day. And the Persian Empire died, and the Grecian Empire died, and the Roman Empire eventually died, just like it was described by Daniel. But one kingdom is still going on that's been around for 2,000 years, and that's the kingdom of Christ. Justin Martyr, in his discussion with Trypho, the Jewish scholar, about 150 AD, says this: when Daniel speaks of the stone, which was cut without hands, this signifies that it is not a work of man, but a work of the will of the Father and God of all things who brought him forth. And the same thing he proclaimed when he spoke of one like a son of man who received the everlasting kingdom. In saying like to a son of man, he appeared and was man, but not of human seed. See, what Justin Martyr is doing is linking Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. It's the same story with different imagery. You know, one is it's the stone, it's the kingdoms in a statue, and here are the 4 different kingdoms of the beast. But they're telling the same story, the interruption of these earthly kingdoms with the eternal heavenly kingdom brought into the history of the world through the Messiah. All right, let's take a deep dive into the Bethlehem prophecy. And this Bethlehem prophecy, which I hinted at the beginning, was what first started me to begin asking questions and talking to rabbis. Micah 5:2, but you, O Bethlehem, from you shall come forth to me one who is to be ruler, according to the Aramaic Targum, the Messiah, in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from of ancient days, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord. There's more of that shepherding in this imagery. In the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and he shall be great to the ends of the earth. Okay. Not only is he going to be born in Bethlehem, but he's going to be great to the ends of the earth. Question: do you know anybody from Bethlehem who's great to the ends of the earth? Anyone? There aren't a lot of famous Bethlehemites. It's a small town. But there is one famous guy. And there's cartoons about him every Christmas. That's how I was like, whoa, I've seen this guy. Here's a funny story. When I'm reading the Gospels for the first time, I'm like, yeah, but where's the part about the little kid with the drums?
Yeah.
Justin Martyr says, and hear what happened. Hear what part of the earth he was to be born in. As another prophet Micah foretold, he spoke thus, and you, O Bethlehem. And he tells that prophecy. Now there is a village in the land of the Jews, 35 stadia from Jerusalem, in which Jesus Christ was born, as you can ascertain also from the registers of the taxing made under Cyrenius, your first procurator in Judea. He is writing to Emperor Antonius Pius around 150 AD, and he is so confident, he doesn't say, and you, Antonius Pius, just take a leap of faith. If you do, it'll all go well for you. You'll have warm internal, warm fuzzies in your heart. He says, go check the records. He is so confident that he just writes it, look in the registers. You can see that this is exactly the way it's described. He doesn't even tell them to look at our religious texts. He says, look at the official records of the Romans. If so many things, Eusebius says, were proclaimed by the Hebrew prophets, and if their fulfillment is so clear to us all today, who would not marvel at their inspiration? Who will not agree that their teaching and beliefs must be sure and true? This should silence the tongues of false accusers who contend that we are unable to give a logical demonstration of our case, but require those who come to us by faith alone and say we only teach our followers like irrational animals to shut their eyes and staunchly obey whatever we say without examining it at all. That is a caricature, according to Eusebius. It's a caricature. They call us the faithful ones, he says elsewhere, because we talk about faith, and they say it's blind faith, but it's not. This is if you just look at these prophecies that were written so many years ago and can look at what happened in the history, in the real world, you will see there's a very good ground for the assurance of our faith. Be a Berean. Branch prophecies. All right. Branch prophecies are all throughout the writings of the prophets. So I have here some from Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zechariah. You have these promises about a coming branch. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. I talked about that. And a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. So that idea is, exile, the Davidic line is cut off, and the logs are hauled off, but then a little shoot shoots out, and then it branches and has fruit. Jeremiah, behold, the days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness. Zechariah, behold, I will bring my servant the branch. Zechariah 6. And I say to him, thus says the Lord, behold, the man whose name is the branch, for he shall branch out of his place, and he will build the temple. So a lot of these prophecies talk about the branch, and when you get to the book of Matthew, he says that Jesus went and lived in a city called Nazareth so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he should be called a Nazarene. This was one of the prophecies that was mentioned in the book that I read by Isaac Troche and others. It said this is one of those fake prophecies because you can't find any prophecy about the Nazarene in any place in the Old Testament. And immediately before, Matthew tells about his family left Egypt, and then to fulfill the words of the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. I think it's a line from Hosea. When you go to that passage, it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So it's a prophecy about the nation of Israel. And so when I looked at those two things, and I read the criticism of the Jewish scholar, I said, it does look like Matthew is trying to shoehorn some there. Number one, it doesn't look like this is about the Messiah. Number two, this other prophecy I can't even find anywhere. In fact, the study Bible that I had at the time, New King James Study Bible, whatever it was, it pointed me to a verse about a Nazarite vow. And like, even someone who had been a Christian for 2 months, I knew that wasn't right. It doesn't say Nazarite, it says Nazarene. And the Nazarite vow is, you don't shave your hair, and you don't drink alcohol, totally different thing. But when I was in seminary, I read reading something, and I found that the word Nazareth is the word branch. It's the word branch. So Jesus is the man whose name is the branch, is Jesus of Nazareth. That's the name that he was given, because there's a lot of Jesuses. So you have to, anytime there's a lot of people with a popular name, they always have a second name, and he was called Jesus of Nazareth. He is the ultimate branch who fulfills the branch prophecies, and part of the reason he fills that. Notice what Matthew says, so that what was spoken by the prophets, plural. In the previous one, he says spoken by the prophet. It doesn't say Hosea, it just says by the prophet, singular, because he referred to that one. And that one prophecy about out of Egypt I called my son can be explained if you understand the way people thought about Jesus recapitulating the whole history of Israel in his one person. So he is in the wilderness for 40 days, just like Israel was in for 40 years. He is redoing Adam and Eve. He's redoing Israel. He is the true Israel. And that makes sense over time. What I did when I was young in my Christian life, I didn't know what to do with some of the objections. But I kind of put a placeholder there, a little yellow sticky tab on that problem with a question mark, things to be resolved. And over time, they got resolved. All right, the new covenant. I will try and wrap these up here. Actually, maybe what time do we want to be done here, by 2?
Definitely by 2.
Okay, so maybe I'll try and wrap up within 10 minutes. All right. The new covenant, this is the promise from Jeremiah 31, and that is, there's going to be a day when a new covenant is inaugurated that is not like the covenant made at Mount Sinai. It's a totally different covenant that comes. And that covenant that's not like the covenant of Mount Sinai will be rooted in forgiveness of sin, which is what, Hebrews says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. It was ready to be vanished away there. Hadn't vanished away. Guess what? Daniel told us when it would, when the temple was destroyed. And it hadn't happened yet in the time of Hebrews. It was written before the temple was destroyed. The story of Joseph is a good way to think about the picture of Jesus. He is the one despised by his brothers and basically killed, and he is left in a pit, but he ends up at the right hand of the most powerful, causes a great redemption. His father thought he was dead, and for Jacob, it's a resurrection. Yeah. A lot of parallels there, right? Well, but the key idea that I want you to think about here is that is a historical narrative that tells the story of Jesus not in a prophetic way like this. It's telling the story of Jesus by the events of the Israelites. And the key theme that I have highlighted here is that the brothers hated him. And the fact that they hated him was a part of their own redemption. They hated him, and they hated him even more. And so they hated him even more. These are the themes that come up. And Joseph himself will say, you, which you meant for evil, God meant for good. Because he sent me here in advance. But that hating ends up becoming a hugely important theme in the time of Jesus. When they heard these things in the synagogue, they were filled with wrath, and they hated him. And they brought him to the brow of the hill so they could throw him off the cliff. And then Jesus tells a parable about the citizens who hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. Just like the people of Jesus' day hate him. But that story of the hatred of Jesus that causes redemption is all throughout the Bible. Look at some of these prophecies. It starts in Deuteronomy, actually. For when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, they will turn to other gods and serve them and despise me and break my covenant. It's Yahweh talking. Yahweh is the despised one. Psalm 22, I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. This is the suffering servant in Psalm 22. Yahweh in Isaiah 1, they have forsaken Yahweh and they have despised the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah 49. Thus says Yahweh, the Redeemer of Israel and his Holy One. So the Holy One is another person with Yahweh. To one deeply despised and abhorred by the nation. Isaiah 52. Continually all the day my name is despised. Isaiah 53. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows. This is all about that upside down, topsy-turvy theology of the cross. It is unfathomable. You don't make a story like this, where the hero is despised by his own people. It's crazy. And yet, this is the story that is at the heart. This is the prophetic part of it that becomes fulfilled by Jesus and then takes over the world to become the most popular worldview in the world. Whoever hates me and hates my Father also, Jesus said. But the word that it was written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without cause. There he's quoting the Psalms. Psalm 35:19. Think about the language of the cornerstone. Psalm 118. Open to me the gate of righteousness that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. Okay, I can't open the gate. The gate has to be opened for me. That's a clear teaching from Psalm 118. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. I don't save myself as another clear implication. The stone that the builders rejected, there's that despised and rejected language again. The stone that builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That was also language that you thought they were singing as Jesus came down the Mount of Olives. Isaiah 8, but the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear and let him be your dread. And he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling. It's offensive. The things Jesus said were offensive. And this is referring to Yahweh. A trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and many shall stumble upon it. That's the thing that whenever I try to bring up things to some of my Jewish relatives, it's amazing how their eyes glaze over, because they're so clear. The only thing that it could be is like a supernatural thing. Like this is not only is it a suffering servant who is depicted, but what's also there is that he will be rejected by his own people, and that continues to this day. That's also part of the story. I mean, the very beginning, who will believe this report? The beginning of Isaiah 52. Who's believed this report? It's going to be a small thing. Let me take questions at the end. It's going to be a small, narrow group that ends up believing the report. And it was definitely, it was big because it starts at Acts chapter 2, 3,000, then it goes to 5,000, then it goes to many myriads. And by the time you're in the 60s, it's reported in various places in the writings of Clement and then Tacitus, innumerable multitudes. But so it grew rapidly. All right, Deuteronomy 32, but Jeshurun, which means upright one, he's referring to Israel, grew fat and kicked and then forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. That's that rock language that is also the stone language. He's scoffing at the rock has been going on a long time. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. Matthew 21 records Jesus' summary of that Psalm 118 cornerstone imagery. He tells that parable of the vineyard and concludes by this: therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away and given to a people producing its fruit. The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. G.K. Beale says that that's alluding to the Daniel promise. The Daniel promise is that stone that crushes all the kingdoms of the world, including the Mosaic theocracy. It's crushing Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and even Jerusalem, because it's now, that is no longer a kingdom that is needed. It was a guardian that was destined to be destroyed, just like Daniel predicted. And those who sign up with Jesus, have the ultimate everlasting kingdom. They follow Jesus because he was the point of it all. He is the stone. He's the stumbling stone. And those who wanted, what's the line? They wanted the kingdom. They just didn't want God in it. They wanted the blessings, but not God. That's basically what Adam and Eve want, right? Like, I want to be able to be my own, I want to be able to define good and evil for myself. I don't want to have to listen to somebody else define it for me. So they want to be in Eden. They just don't want God to be in control. All right, so we'll end with this. This is just the whole idea of the stricken, smitten, and afflicted one that is in various texts. So striking and smiting and a suffering servant has been there from the beginning. Just think about the way this is foreshadowed in the very, very beginning from Genesis 3, where there's that first promise, the proto-euangelion, the very first gospel promise. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers, and he shall strike your head, and you shall strike his heel. Same verb in both cases. Sometimes it's crush and bruise. It's the same verb. So striking with the heel to the head of the snake, and the snake striking, it's a death blow in each case. It's a death blow in each case. So this is a prophecy of the death of the one who conquers Satan. And Exodus 17, behold, I will stand there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock. It's striking the rock where Yahweh is standing. And that's what causes the water of life. Psalm 22, they pierced my hands and my feet. This striking of, the one who's affixed to this this place. That seems to be the best interpretation, that it's representing the crucifixion. Isaiah 53, he is stricken, smitten, and afflicted. Zechariah 12, I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look upon me whom they have pierced, wait a minute, who's talking? Yahweh is talking. Yahweh is the one who's going to be pierced. They shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. And then chapter 13, verse 7, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares Yahweh of hosts. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. Jesus applies this very passage to himself in Matthew 26 and Mark 14. He's the man who stands next to God. I think that's probably the verse that John, the narrator, has in mind when he says, no one has seen God, but the one who stands next to him at his right hand, he has made him known. The man who stands next to him is the one Zechariah prophesied about here. He's Yahweh, but he's the one next to Yahweh. He's the Word who was with God, but who was God. All right, I think we can do this and then we'll just end here. This is, you guys are familiar, we've hinted at Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, I could spend time going through every single verse, but we don't have enough time for that. What I can do is summarize what the Dead Sea Scroll writers thought about this passage by this particular hymn. I'll close with this, is a Qumran hymn that you can see from a couple of different texts. So you know how the Dead Sea Scrolls are partial? What you have are missing pieces. But what we find is a little bit of this hymn here, 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 and here. And when you put them all together, you kind of fill in the details. What's missing here is you can find over here. And so this is a composite of a hymn that was found at Qumran, and it goes like this. He established his truth from of old. His seat is eternal, a mighty throne in the congregation of the angels. None of the ancient kings shall sit on it, nor their nobles. Nebuchadnezzar, you don't qualify. There are none comparable to me in my glory. My glory I will not give to any other. Who is speaking then? Okay, this is the Messiah speaking. No one else besides me shall be exalted, for I have dwelt on high in the heavens. I am reckoned with the divine beings, and my abode is in the holy congregation. Who is considered as contemptible as I am I, and who has been despised like me? Okay, there, the despised and rejected one. He's definitely alluding to Isaiah 53 with that language. Who like me is rejected? There's despised and rejected. Who is comparable to me in my glory? So there's echoes of the Psalms, echoes from Isaiah. Who of those who sail the seas shall return, telling of mine equal? Who has borne troubles like me? Who is like me among the divine beings? Who can endure the utterance of my lips? For I am the beloved of the King, and to my glory no one compares. Sing praise, O beloved ones. If he's a divine being, who's the king? Sing glory, sing praise, O beloved ones. Sing praise to the King of glory. Light shines out, joy pours forth, fear ceases. A fountain for eternal blessing opens up. Sounds kind of like the water coming out of the rock and the imagery of the water flowing out of the temple. All those, it's definitely, the Qumran person who wrote this is definitely interacting with the Bible. Iniquity is ended, and sin and guilt shall be no more. What happens in Isaiah 53? You have the despised and rejected one atones for sin and gets rid of iniquity. And in that passage here, I'll just cut to the end of the highlight. Here, the suffering servant passage, what we find it's the announcement of good news that goes around the world. This person is exalted and yet marred. How can you have a person who's lifted up and highly exalted and yet marred beyond recognition? Well, John makes it clear. When he is lifted up, he will draw all men to himself. But the narrator steps in and says, he said this speaking of the kind of death that he would die. His lifting up is on the cross. He will sprinkle many nations. That's a universal sprinkling of atoning blood that makes pure the nations. He is pierced for our transgressions. That piercing language happens here. It happens in Psalm 22, pierced hands and feet. It happens in Zechariah, where it's Yahweh who is pierced. He will be cut off from the land of the living. That cut off language also is in Daniel. He's cut off and for the which causes a redemption. He's laid in the grave, including a rich man in his death. Man, that's a good connection to the New Testament with Joseph of Arimathea giving the grave. He's laid in the grave and cut off from the land of the living. That's a pretty clear symbol of death, right? In fact, the next one even says, with laid in the grave and with the rich man in his death. Okay, so it's pretty clear he died. He will see light and his days will be prolonged. Seeing light is not in the ESV, but it is in the Greek Old Testament. It's there in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The two oldest, and the ESV, a lot of New Testament, a lot of English translations go with the Masoretic text only. It's the 9th century Hebrew. And I just say, go back to the oldest copies you have. Dead Sea Scrolls. It's there. He sees light at the end. Wait, he's dead, now he sees light. And his days are prolonged. And then he bears iniquity, justifies many. He's numbered with the transgressors. Jesus even says, this prophecy has to be fulfilled in me. He was numbered with the transgressors. He applies this to himself. And then he divides spoils in a victory celebration. Very few people, once they're put in the grave, do that. Very few people. Jack Allen knows one. He sees light, and then he's dividing spoils in a victory celebration. It's death, burial, resurrection, which is why you find Paul in his 1 Corinthians Creed saying that the gospel is rooted in Christ's death for sin according to the scriptures. His burial, his resurrection on the third day, according to the scriptures. Because these things were revealed in advance. And that idea that it is attested is part of the gospel. It's not just the facts that are the gospel. It's an attested gospel. This is seen by witnesses, actual people like Peter, and foreseen by the prophets, actual people like Isaiah. All right. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.